Thank you for joining the Change I Am Possible, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Gaya Herrington, who's the Director Sustainability Services at KPMG. Gaya Herrington was all over the news last year for taking the report, the Limits to Growth report, MIT, and testing it. The news was that civilization collapse by 2040 is imminent. So why don't we start with the backstory? I mean, before getting into what you have done, why don't we get to the report? What did the report suggest at that point in time?
Yeah. Great question. Let's start with that. Yeah. So this year, it will be 50 years ago, so half a century that this book was published by a group of MIT scientists, as you said. And what they had done was they built the first dynamic systems model of the world. So system dynamics modeling is a way to model, obviously, systems. And what is a system? It's where variables are all connected to each other. You model a few variables and you assume a lot of, implicitly, you assume a lot of constancy. And that is not the case in systems modeling. So all variables can influence each other. And what you see if you look at systems behavior is that you see a lot of nonlinear behavior. So past trends cannot just be extrapolated into the future. You see jumps, delays, exponential growth, exponential decay, etc., which is actually a lot of the processes that we see in the real world. So I would argue that for a lot of things in the real world, system dynamics modeling is probably a better way to model things. So this group of MIT scientists had done that for the world, so global systems model. And then they ran it, and to their own surprise, they saw that if we kept pursuing expansionary economic growth, as we are currently doing in pretty much every country in the world, if we keep doing that, we would see a steep decline in food production, population, industrial output, and human well-being levels. And so that was the key message. They said, well, this goal needs to change. It is not sustainable. It means that either we change the goal ourselves or the limits to growth will be forced on us. But it's simply not possible to keep pursuing growth.
The media likes to push things and blow it up because I guess sensation journalism always works. But yes, I mean, it's not something that we can take lightly. So right. it is something serious because I think globally the climate change is hitting home. Just recently, I think 2 days back, there was a tsunami at Tonga. So these are happening too often now. So tell me, was there anything specific that caught your attention to revisit the 1972 Limit to Growth report?
Yeah, well, it just made a lot of sense to me that pursuing, we see it these days, right? This was 50 years ago. So at that point, if people had listened, we actually would have been able to make a relatively smooth transition to a sustainable world. But of course, people did not listen and they kept pursuing GDP growth very, very much. And so now we're bumping into these limits. That's basically what we're seeing. And this was already predicted. And if you keep pursuing that, you're going to see increasing inequalities, right? Economic and social inequalities. You're going to see increasing pollution and scarcity of resources. All of this is happening. We see more and more water scarcity, right? Climate change is just carbon pollution, right? And that's not the only pollution that we're facing. We have entire dead zones now of land, of plastics in the ocean. I don't know what it is in India, but I do know that the studies here in America, they show a 50% decline in sperm cells in men, of course. That's highly significant, right? And scientists think that is also because of all the chemicals in our environment, in our food, in our furniture, in our water, etc. They are found everywhere, including in women's breast milk. So our newborns that are born in this society are already exposed to this kind of pollution. So all of those trends basically and more is what prompted me to do a data check.
Yes, I think the problem with the world is or consumption. And that leads to more production. It's a loop because we have forgotten the art of conserving. We are constantly producing, which obviously correlates to your pollution, so many problems, and there's consumption, which leads to more production, and there's no conservation whatsoever. And this race to grow the GDP and the capitalism itself, because businesses are all functioning at a profit at any cost, and there is no ethos of looking at ourselves and possibly recorrecting this. And I think we are all in a race to nowhere. I don't know whether we'll be able to kind of slow down anymore, because I hope that a government or startup community or enterprise community figures a way where we can create a circular economy where we create stuff but we do not pollute. Globally, I think, the onus is on the rich countries, the economically empowered countries, to kind of look and recorrect the wrongs. When the news says 2040 societal collapse imminent, would you want to unpack that a little bit? What do you actually mean by that?
So what they did, what you can do with that global model, which is called World 3, is run scenarios based on specific assumptions. So there was the scenario that was run on only historic averages. That was called business as usual, and that very much showed a collapse. There were also scenarios where they assumed, for example, that we would divert resources away from industrial output towards human services, like access to healthcare and education. And that produced a stable society. So it's not that we're doomed towards a collapse, which is also how this was presented a lot of times, right? This model predicts that we're doomed. It was not a doom scenario. It was a warning, like, hey, we need to change things. So what I did is I conducted empirical data from organizations like the World Bank, United Nations, the Ecological Footprint Network, etc. And so all publicly available data sets. And I compared that against the scenarios. And then what I found is that we are very much aligned with the business. Right now, we're very aligned with the business as usual scenario and the comprehensive technology scenario. So we are least aligned with a scenario that predicted a sustainable world, basically, which is called a stabilized world scenario. We are not aligned with that one, but we're also not that far off. So the key message of my research was, well, right now we're not heading in the right direction, but we do have a now or never moment really in history to change our trajectories. So this window of opportunity is closing. So it's really, like I said, now or never.
What kind of data was added onto your algorithm model, and how legit was the data? Where was the data collected from?
Yeah, so the variables in the model included, amongst others, population, agricultural output, industrial output, services, ecological footprint, welfare levels, and natural resources. So this was obviously very high level. And those are the variables that I collected data from. So, for example, about population, the UN publishes population, right? World Bank does that too. So all those things, I had to use proxies for certain variables like industrial output. The United Nations produces, and the World Bank produces of that too. Obviously, that's always going to be a proxy. Natural resources were, I used fossil fuel reserves for that. So that's obviously a proxy too, because, for example, water is one too. And then for pollution levels, I used carbon emissions, which is obviously an underestimation of pollution, like I said. But this was very interesting. Pollution data was the hardest to find of any variable in my research. But then what I found is that we're most closely aligned with the scenario that predicts collapse as a result from pollution. So one of my side conclusions was also that we need to collect way more data, and that's very interesting that we have a very good data on how much we produce and our GDP and all those things. Right, we measure that like every month or every quarter, but we have almost no idea how much of these chemicals we have in our environment.
So you're saying there is no data available on pollution. Is it because, I mean, these are because some of the top polluting industries are the richest industries in the world? They are the ones who run the world. Is that the reason why the data wasn't available?
That's a likely part of the explanation, isn't it? Because they produce those chemicals and they release it into the environment. And in today's economic paradigm, we call those externalities. But like, if you are part of a system, there really is no externality because everything is connected to everything. It will come back to you, right? So, and it does. It comes back to us and it impacts our human health.
Right. So has your research been endorsed by any climate scientist or individuals, organizations?
Yeah, I would. It's been referenced, it's been cited, in other scientific papers, as that goes. And I would say it's also very much embedded in other research, right? So that's the thing. If it was just my research, it was easy to discount it. But it's like it predicts declining welfare levels as resulting from pollution, including climate change. That is hardly research conclusion that stands by itself, right? That's very much in accordance with pretty much everything that of the latest reports say, well, we're nearing climate tipping point. So if you don't act now, it might be too late to ever do something. This is obviously, you see this a lot. You see Swiss Re putting out a warning last year about, these countries, a significant proportion of countries in the world are already at risk of complete ecosystem collapse. That's what they calculated. So like I said, if it was just my report, it was like, hey, yeah, maybe it's a bit overblown. But I think if anything, it's probably a bit on the optimistic side.
Right. So when you say that it's not just your individual report, could you talk a little bit about the people who you've been collaborating with for building this report?
Right. This report I wrote by myself. The paper I wrote by myself. But of course, I used a lot of things from other people. Like I said, there are people at the UN and the World Bank compiling this data that I used, right? And after that, this original Limits to Growth report was commissioned by the Club of Rome, which is an international organization comprised of just thinkers, politicians, artists around the world thinking about world problems, basically. They commissioned that report. They asked those MIT scientists to make that model. And they still exist today, and they asked me to join their economics transformation committee. So with them, I've been working on an update to the report, Limits to Growth, with a new system dynamics model of the world. And that we will be presenting to the UN Stockholm 50+ meeting in June this year.
Right. So what do you think individuals, countries, or organizations need to do to avert that 2040 societal collapse that you're talking about? What can we all do?
Yeah. And that's basically in the Limits to Growth research as well, because like I said, there was this one scenario, the stabilized world scenario, where there is no collapse. So we should look at the assumptions made in that scenario and see if we can find that. And those are recommendations that you see coming back in pretty much any other developmental research work, which is let go of this GDP growth at all costs and put well-being at the heart of your economy. I think a very strong narrative that we're seeing right now is that we need growth to lift people out of poverty. But I think it's very important, and you talked about that too, when you said, well, the responsibility is really on the rich countries. And that's true. And within the rich countries, it's on the responsibility of the rich people there. Because interestingly enough, in a lot of developed economies, there's also enormous inequality where a lot of people are still actually living in poverty, even though the countries themselves, in the aggregate, are very, very rich. So it really lies on the shoulders of the rich to share more, which is, I think, the real solution. Growth is not the solution, it's to share. And when you believe that narrative of, well, but we need growth to lift people out of poverty, you have to ask yourself, who is benefiting from that story? Because that is a way that the rich never have to share it. We just increase the pie, right? But really, when we increase the pie, we bump into planetary limits, which in the end is going to decrease the well-being of everybody. So the solution is to just take this indirect way of getting to poverty eradication, which doesn't work anyway, right? I live in the US. It's the richest country in the history of the world. And we still have people who don't have access to education, really, who don't have access to healthcare, who are really living in abject poverty. But we have small pockets of the country. Some people are living very well in the US, but we have pockets in the country where their sewage isn't even working. So surely if growth really was the solution to poverty, wouldn't it have happened by now here, at least? So it's just not very believable anymore, I think.
Yeah, so it's so very weird, because it's such a complicated problem, and it's not so very easy. And you pointed out about the rich, because data suggests that 1% of the global population, the rich elites, own 90% of the entire global wealth, and the redistribution of the wealth, if technology comes and plays a role with blockchain, decentralization. I mean, I don't really know, but I mean, there's so much complication, but somehow, at least from my perspective, the conversations that I'm having, that there is a ray of hope with technology, because technology is the tool which has always enabled us. So do you see technology as a tool playing a role in possibly maybe, that stabilized world, going towards the stabilized world? Do you see that as a possibility?
Yes. Great question. Great question. And you put it exactly right. Technology is a tool. It is not our savior. So what I mean with that is, as long as we keep holding on to this goal of growth, the tool of technology will also serve that goal. If we change that goal towards meeting human needs within planetary limits, right? If we adopt this concept of really, so you enough for each, but also a limit in this enough in the sense that you put a limit on how much we really think we want. And once you've adopted that, yes, technology is going to be an absolutely indispensable part of the solution, right? We absolutely need technology, but it will not deliver those solutions by itself. We first have to change our mindset.
Right. So someone who's seen the data, played with the data, and knows the prediction, what the data predicts by 2040, how scared are you? Would you like my audience to know that if we do not correct, what could be the 2040 scenario?
First and foremost, I would absolutely love to be proved wrong. I would be, if none of this comes true, and I would die an old lady mocked for being completely wrong in history, I would die happily. Okay. I just, it's just, the evidence is just so overwhelming. Like I said, my report is hardly the only one that came to this conclusion. It's almost an academic cliche at this point. So yes, I do think that we will see, if we don't adopt this new narrative, I think we're going to see a lot more suffering, in a nutshell. I think we're going to see a lot more division. I think we're going to see wars fought over clean water. I think we're going to see a lot of climate refugees, which will increase xenophobia even more. I think, and that is a possibility as well if we don't make this transition. I think we totally have it in us as humans, because we are very much capable of revolutions, and I don't mean in a violent way, but if we change our mindsets, a lot of nonlinear jumps can happen, and we really do have the means and the technology to make this happen. And we do still, most importantly, have the time. If we will, but we also had the time 50 years ago, and we did not make use of that opportunity. Things are different now. I think, for example, the younger generation doesn't, if you look in the US, which is the capitalist center of the world still, I would say, or at least historically it was, but the younger generation, more people now are more favorably towards socialism than capitalism. So I think our mindsets are changing. Will it be quickly enough? I really don't know.
Right. Would you like to summarize what your report says? Again, those 3 or 4 scenarios, the business as usual, stabilized world. Would you like to summarize that?
Yes. Well, yes. And it's basically ultimately what I've been saying. So business as usual is the narrative where we hold on to this idea of we can keep growing forever, which is just not really, you don't see that anywhere else in the world. But that is the economic paradigm, that we can supposedly do that forever. And then there's the other one that I used was comprehensive technology. So here that's where the scenario that you just basically sort of described by saying, well, we can keep pursuing growth because technology, we can innovate ourselves out of any limit. And this is, so it does actually reduce the steepness of the decline. So we can, at least in the aggregates, so we can do, technology will help something, but it cannot really avoid declines. And that's the difference with the third one that I mentioned, stabilized world scenario, where we also use all those technologies, but we also consciously limit the growth to industrial output. Say we're gonna satisfy ourselves with enough, and we're going to divert the rest of the resources directly towards human services of healthcare and education.
Lovely. So, Gaya, what comes next? I mean, are you gonna? Is there any concrete conversations that you're having with organizations or bodies such as United Nations? And is there anything that which you would like to share with the audience?
Yes, thank you for asking. So there are a couple of things. I've been asked to write a book about my research because the journal article that you saw, of course, it was a journal article, so it's very much neutral tone, and you can't really talk about mindsets and stuff. So when I was asked to write this book, I very much went into this whole thing of well-being, what makes people happy, etc. What are all the things that I just mentioned to you? So my book will come out later this year as well. I'm working with the Club of Rome on a book that gives more concrete policy recommendations, as I mentioned, that will be presented to the UN. And that is, I think, and what we did there was we looked at the global system and identified leverage points. So when you work in a system, there are, a network is never completely random, of course, so you have little pressure points, so to say, where you have more influence than the others, right? It's just like, say, social media connections. People with a lot of connections have more influence, they're called influencers. So this also happens in non-human systems like our world. And we identified 5 leverage points for the global system. This is very interesting, I think, for also for India, for example, with your because you have a lot of farmers still, and there's a lot of interesting things going on there. Because one leverage point is regenerative agriculture. How are we going to keep producing enough food with climate change, with pollution of land and water, while our population is growing, for example? So right now we use a lot of fertilizers, pesticides, which is again very harmful for human health. It's killing off insects that we actually eat. So it's not sustainable. But agriculture can actually be regenerative. It can also be done, for example, in a way that it stores carbon. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity in agriculture. So that's one point. Then the second one will not surprise you. That's renewable energy. We all are very well aware of that. Obviously, we need to electrify everything and go to completely renewable energy generation. And then the third one, the third leverage point is very much new growth models. So that's what I already discussed, to reduce, to eliminate really the poverty in the world. For the people at the bottom, we absolutely need also economic growth, but it needs to be in a way that it's circular, as you said, so without the pollution, which is very much possible. The first one is reducing inequalities, partly because we're so divided because of inequalities, it's very hard for us to come together. And so we're talking about very active redistribution, those kind of things that you mentioned. Taking away old rights from the older and richer generation, those kind of things. And the fifth one is a family. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And a large component of that is gender equality. Gender equality is actually a leverage point in the world, which makes sense if you think about it, because it's in large parts of the world, women are completely underutilized. So all this brain capacity that they have, we don't even use a fraction of it a lot of times. And we need all that innovative power to make this transition, right? So access to education and healthcare, especially for women, because also when women have access to healthcare and education, they typically choose to delay having children, having fewer of them. And so when you delay children, typically, on average, you can take better care of them. Infant mortality is lower. And of course, when you have a lower growth population, that reduces the pressure on everything, on the resources.
Lovely, lovely. Wish you the very best, Gaya, for the new book. And thank you, Gaya. I really felt nice talking to you because I've been wanting to talk to you and understand this report, the news that I'd seen in July 2020 about the societal collapse. And I after this conversation, I'm left with equal amount of positivity and negativity. Positivity because I feel that we humans still have a chance to kind of course correct, and negativity because our business as usual model does not allow us to get out from the loop, because we are constantly consuming and producing, and if your business as usual scenario sticks, that means that we will that will lead to a societal collapse. So I hope that the powers that be, I hope that the listeners take notice. I hope that the government understand that we are in an exciting space of time, and there's so much that we can do. We can create a better world if we all join our hands together and take the right decisions. We have, for the first time in human history, we've got tools such as technology to enable us to correct the decisions, the wrong decisions, and make it right. So on that note, Guy, I really appreciate you being part of the podcast. Thank you for taking time and being part of the podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you.